I'm Jeff Abbott again from Global Scaling Academy, and as Jay mentioned, this is our third webinar, and today we're focusing on blitzscaling, specifically the blitzscalability of your business, the business that you're going to be bringing to the Venture Scaling Bootcamp at MIT. And as a bit of homework, at the end of the last webinar, we asked you, if you would, to go ahead and take the Blitzscalability Assessment at the link that was provided. If you didn't get a chance to do that, you can go now to globalscalingacademy.com and scroll down the page underneath the Blitzscaling graph where you'll find the assessment. If you want to take it there, that sends a result to you. If not, we're going to take it here together, because what we're interested in, again, is primarily two things: understanding where you're at and what your challenges are relating to scaling and blitzscaling, so that we can calibrate the content of the upcoming bootcamp specifically as possible to meet your needs. And secondly, to answer any questions that you may have along the way. So with no further ado, I'm going to jump in, and we're going to start out by doing a brief review. Again, this is me, Jeff Abbott. If your screen is there, you'll see that I'm the very same person up in your screen, pictured here. And Chris Ye, my business partner and the co-author of Blitzscaling, will be with you next week, as he was during the first webinar, to share stories about case studies of companies that have successfully blitzscaled, some of the insider stories from Silicon Valley and all the interviews that went into the book. So the objectives for the webinar today are a quick review of blitzscaling concepts. We're not going to go into the same depth as we have before, but let's just say this is a quick highlight for those of you that may be joining for the first time. A review of growth factors and growth limiters. We're going to review the blitzscaling assessment, the blitzscalability assessment that you took, and see how the group scored by asking you to respond to the very same questions here as a group. This will give us all a chance to see where people in the group are with regard to their self-perceived ability to blitzscale. We're going to look and see where the greatest opportunities are, and it's going to allow you to influence the way we spend our time together in the various areas related to blitzscaling during the bootcamp. So, as a bit of review, remember that blitzscaling is iterative. The first thing you have to do are the things that don't scale. This is the difficult work of finding product market fit or building a product that embarrasses you, as Reid Hoffman is fond of saying. Once you do these things, you can hopefully get to the next stage of blitzscaling, where you maybe have that second thread of a business, that second channel that you're approaching, or the second extension of your product, and hopefully you can scale that as well. So you're never really arriving at a state of blitzscaling. It's something that you're coming in and out of with respect to different pieces of the business. And the whole process is iterative and continually repeats. What we talked about is, if you want to blitzscale, the first thing you need to do is define a blitzscalable market. So a blitzscalable market was one that possessed certain characteristics. Those were the growth factors and limiters. Then you had to have the necessary capital to scale, along with the management techniques and good strategic decisions that would allow you to grow this business without blowing up your rocket ship as you achieve escape velocity. And finally, if you were able to do all of those things, you'd be on a plan for global domination and hopefully rampant profits. So what was it that made a market blitzscalable? This is the way Chris and Reid have described it: a big market. How big? Preferably as big as possible, and also one that is wide open. One where you're not creating another operating system. That's been done before, or another search engine. Although DuckDuckGo is doing really well, most people wouldn't have thought of trying to compete with Google. It's also a business that has massive distribution, or rather where you can gain massive distribution through partnerships or through virality. A blitzscalable business is also one that has intrinsically high gross margins. And it's also one that exhibits strong network effects. And if you can score well by entering a market that has these 4 characteristics, while also avoiding the trap of not really having product market fit, of scaling too fast before you found product market fit, or failing in your scaling because it turns out you didn't have the ability to scale the human side or the infrastructural side of your business. If you can get all of these features pointing in the right direction, or a strong combination of them, then perhaps you'll be able to blitzscale. And so the purpose of our Blitzscalability assessment is to identify what you're thinking today about how do you fit on these scales. What's the session? What's the code on today's Menti session? It should show up as soon as we get to a question that requires an answer. These are just background slides. If it doesn't, then I'll go into panic mode and come up with a better answer. There it is, as I thought. So our first question today, and this is a repeat for those of you that were here last week, and this is mainly because we're collecting this feedback and the application is kind enough to store it for us so that we can reflect back on it, is please answer what kind of business model best describes your business today. Is it business to consumer, business to business, a budding marketplace, a social impact business, or perhaps some other kind of business that the world has not ever seen yet? Okay, so it looks like we've got a good blend. During the last webinar, we had a really solid blend. We had about 70% B2C, 20% B2B. We had a couple marketplaces and a couple social businesses. We had really excellent responses across the spectrum. And this is useful to us because we want to make sure that what we're planning is relevant and appropriate for people no matter what business model they may be bringing forward. So continue to answer. And of course, there's no right answer on this one. This is really just demographic feedback. It is, generally a little easier to blitzscale business to consumer businesses or marketplaces than it is B2B businesses, simply because of the effort that requires, or rather that is required to grow an enterprise business and the intensive sales focus and some of the infrastructure costs that come there. But every business can scale faster than it's scaling today. And that is where the blitzscaling framework come in. It's not a question of can you or can't you blitzscale, it's a question of can you incrementally scale faster than your competition? And we think that these techniques and strategies will help you get closer. Great. So I'm going to move forward to make sure that we keep advancing. The next question was a review. So we talked as well about the various stages of blitzscaling that were expressed in orders of magnitude of the number of employees, the family stage being sort of the traditional early stage startup with 1 to 10 employees, the tribe roughly 10 to 100, and the village roughly 100 to 1,000. We didn't have any participants in the venture scaling webinar last week who were above the village stage. So the next question is just remind us, for those of you that are here today, what stage are you in? Would you consider yourself a family stage company, a tribe, or a village? And if you're a city or a nation, thanks for coming, and you should probably come join our mentor team, because it means that you've already been through some of the toughest phases of scaling. In fact, it's tough to transition between any one of these stages. As I mentioned last week, the research has shown that about 50% of the leadership of young companies isn't able to make the transition between one stage and the next. And we've also found that the transition between the tribe stage and the village stage for most people is the most complex of all. It's where you really do need to make that final commitment to going from being a pirate to a navy, where you really do move from dialogue to a more broadcasting type of approach to internal communications. Great, so this gives us a sense of who's here. And again, the next question, what we're gonna do is, so I asked you at the end of the last webinar to go ahead and try to complete the Blitzscalability Assessment. And the first question in that assessment is about your market, whether it's a big market or a small market. And so the first question before that is even more basic. Do you have a clear and well-defined idea of what market you're addressing? Because obviously, market size is, for us, one of the most important considerations of your ability to blitzscale. In fact, one of the first questions that you get from a venture capital investor is, how big is the market you're addressing? And of course, the right answer that they're wanting to hear is that it's an enormous answer, an enormous market that's pretty open, and that you know how, and you have some secret sauce to get into it. Perfect. This is great. Now, how would you describe your market? And this is an open response. I'm just trying to get a sense here again of, in your own words, what's the market you're addressing? How are we going to use this feedback? Well, the Global Scaling Academy and the MIT Venture Scaling Bootcamps team, we're going to look at this and make sure that the examples we use and the type of materials that we bring, in some cases the mentors that we select, to the greatest degree possible, are familiar with and prepared to address some of the challenges that you may uniquely face in these particular markets. Excellent. Healthcare, lending, kid activity marketplace. We have a great diversity here. The footwear industry, insurance, all segments of industry. Well, one thing that I can say is you've all chosen very large markets. The online organic meat delivery market, excellent. Where do I sign up? And consulting in emerging markets, that's interesting. Perfect. Okay, we're getting a very interesting variety of responses here, which among other things guarantees that the peer-to-peer learning at the bootcamp is going to be incredible because it's a very diverse group of people. There is some similarity in the markets that are being addressed, so clusters may form and people may encounter one another that have a lot to share with one another about similar industry challenges, but it's also a rich cohort here, which is what we love, so that divergent ideas and diverse opinions will be there for everyone to benefit from. Excellent. So we're going to move forward. Thank you for sharing once again the kinds of things that you're focused on and the challenges that you are bringing to the Venture Scaling Bootcamp. So this next question, this is coming right off of our Blitzscalability assessment. If you recognize the question, it may be because you took the assessment before. And indeed, we are asking you to repeat it here as a group. If you've not taken it before, well, here's your first time. So how big is the market size for your company? Would you say that it's currently less than $1 billion and is likely to remain so? Or is it one that's growing and could be worth a few $1 billion within the next few years? Is it already a large market measured in the single-digit billions? Or is it a very large market in the tens of billions? Or is it perhaps something that's essentially unbounded? It's a market worth hundreds of billions or even trillions of dollars globally that leaves almost the sky's the limit kind of opportunity for your business to grow if you can hit it correctly. Excellent. So during the boot camp, we'll be sharing a little bit more in detail about the numbers behind how we score these. When we do the assessment, of course, you're putting in a number and we're doing some calculations on the back end, but I'll share a hint that not all of the variables are given the same weighting, and according to our way of thinking, one of the most important attributes of a Blitzscalable company is a larger market. And so we're going to be focusing on ways of helping you make sure that you've identified and described your market in as large reasonable terms as possible. Super. So with regard to market size, here's a few statements that I just want you to comment on. Is your market not big enough, in your opinion? You'd like it to be bigger, and you're just trying to think ways to address your product or service to a larger market? Or maybe it's the case that you have identified multiple market opportunities and you're dabbling in several of them, and your ability to scale depends on deciding which one to double down on and really focus on. Or maybe it's the case that you're in this enormous market, at least you think it's enormous, but you know something that nobody else knows, and you just haven't been able to convince people that in fact this market is out there. And so maybe it's a storytelling problem, maybe it's a fact gathering problem, maybe it's a clinical data or trial results, or just simple traction problem that you need to demonstrate market size. Interesting. So we're getting a lot of spread here across all of these, and that is really, really instructive for us. Thank you for this feedback. So feel free to ask questions over here if there are any further things that you want me to address while I'm kind of calling out the questions and response here. Mariah's over here moderating the chat and doing so with a marked sense of humor. So not only will you get answers, but you'll get great answers. Great, moving on to the next question. And this one is referring to distribution, another one of the variables in the Blitzscaling assessment. So on a scale of 1 to 10, rate these following statements about your current distribution partnerships. Is your situation one where you currently have no distribution in place, or maybe you've got a few partners in place, you've sort of identified the right kind of partners, and now it's just a question of getting more like them? Or is it that you really are strong in this area, and there may be something else that's limiting your scaling? Or perhaps it's even more fundamental than that, which is we really need some help thinking through how to develop distribution partnership strategies, which ones would be the right ones for us, and that's something that you'd like to work on at the MIT Venture Scaling Bootcamp with us. Okay. Yeah, so distribution is definitely a common challenge, and as we can see from the results being displayed on the screen, even though a large number of the respondents have some partnerships in place, or even strong ones, everyone still feels that they need a little bit more help thinking through this. You have been heard. Okay, Sorcerer Stone says, hey Jeff, if there's time to spare at the end, can he advise us what weekly metrics we need to have in order to get us to the blitzscaling stage? Okay, complicated question, but we'll take a crack at it. Thanks, Sorcerer Stone. I love the names everyone up here has chosen as well. I went with a boring one, Jeff Abbott, but I love the creative names. Yeah, the link to menti.com is menti.com, and the number is up above in the chat. Mariah posted it. It's 962935. That's going out to Junior. So it's menti.com, 962935. Okay. Now, referring back to distribution, let's talk about the viral aspect of it. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the strength of the virality of your distribution? So if you have a situation where existing customers never refer new customers, or if there's something about your business that, you know, just makes that very unlikely, something about the business model itself that perhaps you're only, you know, selling confidentially to highly secretive customers or something of the sort, that might be interesting to know. Existing customers sometimes refer new customers, and in some cases, we're getting responses that they always refer new customers. So the question here is, you know, how much of that is your doing, and how much of that is, you know, accidental, and to what degree would it be helpful to spend more time thinking about how to create virality? And feel free to comment over here in the chat bot. Is creating virality, is building virality into the product something that is of interest to people? And we got a question here coming in from Sayantan Chowdhury. Thanks for the prompt reply. Wondering how well blitzscaling applies to nonprofits, the education sector in a third world country, to be precise. So we believe that it applies to almost every case, right? In the sense that, and certainly to social business, it applies very well. Education sector in a third world country. Well, if you go back and look at what the book says, it would clearly suggest that, you know, if you wanted to blitzscale a nonprofit education business, that you should probably do that online. And you should probably do it in a way that builds strong partnerships so that you have important partners, perhaps governments or universities or local chambers of commerce, a variety of organizations that are sharing the fact that your presumably free education is available. So you need a lot of partners. And secondly, the product itself should be very easy to share, should be viral, so that one person that's using it and benefiting from it can share it with others. And so certainly thinking about these variables is really the point. Thinking about them and how to bring them into your business model is the more important question, rather than saying, you know, can I or can't I blitzscale? It's about thinking carefully through these techniques and strategies and seeing to what degree can you apply them. Sorcerer Stones writes, I think virality depends on the type of business we're in. It's harder to have a viral rate in a B2B business or in a regulated enterprise. And healthcare has an even lower viral rate, just my experience. Yeah, I think that's true. It is definitely harder to achieve virality in a B2B business. A B2C, obviously, nothing stops anyone from sharing with someone else, but in this case, you're dealing with gatekeepers, you're dealing with various personas with inside an organization that have to approve a purchase and gain consensus within their organizations. You can overcome some of that by becoming an influencer in groups that they may belong to, industry associations, professional associations that people in those jobs, those personas may belong to, and places they may go to learn how to do better at the specific role that they're playing. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question. We'll come back to Hassan's question here in a second. So on the scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the following statements? We understand what virality is, and we know how to create it. We've tried to make our product more viral, and we failed. Or virality doesn't really apply to our business. And then the final question, we need help developing a more viral product or more viral marketing. From Hassan, how can I make money via my newsletter? I have 10K subscribers, and most of them are VCs and investors. My plan is to make a Bloomberg for the private market and Robinhood together, a place where someone can invest alone or with the private investor without being an accredited investor. I need help. Is there any way I can get some advice? You know, it was interesting. So we were having an investment committee meeting yesterday, and we were reviewing a startup that just got a lot of funding, and their whole business model is to help people monetize newsletters. If you ping me offline, I will, I don't want to open another window here while I'm sharing my screen, Hassan, but I will get you the name of that company. It was founded by a gentleman who has been very successful at building and monetizing newsletters. So I think there's definitely a way to do it. How can you ping me offline? Send your questions to the folks at MIT whose contact information you have, or if you want, you can, if they're cool with that, you can drop an email in here and I'll reply subsequently. Okay, so we got a pretty good understanding of virality and how to create it. Some of us have tried and failed. Some say it doesn't really apply, but everybody's interested in learning how to increase their ability excellent at the boot camp. Good, this is super helpful. All right, so the next, we're moving on. This is the third question on the Blitzscalability Assessment. It's about network effects or network externalities, which exist when a product's value to users increase as the number of users increases. Please evaluate the role that network effects currently play in your business. So our three choices here are, even if you get to critical scale, you don't believe that provides you a significant competitive advantage. You don't believe that network effects may be achieved even at critical scale. This is something to do with the fundamental nature of your business. The option in the middle is achieving critical scale may provide you a temporary competitive advantage, but you don't believe it's one that you can hold on to. And the third choice, which seems to characterize how most people view network effects, is that there's definitely a long-term competitive advantage to trying to achieve them. From Tamra, hey Tamra, is virality achievable for industrial products? For example, systems that attach to the control systems that are already existing and that are already in most every plant in the world. Now that's an interesting question. I mean, I suppose in the sense that if the systems and the sensors could make one another aware of the identity of their particular type of sensor, and if somehow that could be communicated in the form of a message that would get to someone that makes the decision. So in this case, I think we're talking about virality that increases adoption of something that you're selling. Because it's a part of your business model that's creating value. So for example, if virality could indicate that there are further opportunities to place sensors that haven't been placed yet, in other words, that there's gaps in the data that are being reported in the control system, And perhaps that's an opportunity for you to sell more systems or provide better answers through your software tool. Maybe there's some imputation that can be run computationally that, that allows you to say, well, even though I don't have all the data and all the sensors, I'm going to go ahead and impute what's missing with some margin of error, and then say, it could have been better if there had been more sensors, and by the way, we sell sensors. I don't know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but I imagine there's some way to do it, but the question is, how does the sensor communicate to a decision maker? So it looks like everyone, for the most part, has responded here. Sorcerer Stone comments, I think in general that having network effects is a great way to validate that your product is indeed something that people demand and it's solving a meaningful problem. It's a gift that someone in the network is singing your praise. Agreed. Is there an added value beyond the number of users to the customers deriving from the network? I'm not sure I understand that question, but the presumption is that as the number of users grow, the value to everyone in the network grows, either due to the fact that it pulls more interesting outside services or vendors or suppliers into the network, or the collective wisdom of the group increases, or the switching cost increases, so that, once you commit to that standard or that network, that you can rely on it and make an investment around it. So, of course, there's a lot of different types of network effects, and it's very clear, the message is clear here that this is something that you all think is important. So, moving on to the next set of questions. Oops. How well do you understand network effects today and how to create them? Have you tried to develop them? If you answered in the prior one that you didn't have any, or you didn't think they were important, is that because they just don't apply to your business? Or, and finally, would you like to spend time thinking about network effects and how to build them during the boot camp? Excellent. So with most response coming in, we have a fairly strong sort of confidence that people understand network effects and how to create them, that they've tried to develop them. There's a few people that say that they don't really apply, and a goodly sized number of people that would like help understanding and how to build them. Excellent. Once again, thank you for the excellent response. I'm sure that the MIT team, as well as the Global Scaling Academy team, will be delighted to respond and bring some network effects topics into the program. Azamat comments, is there, sorry, we already addressed that one. Junior has the comment, do you think that it's possible to achieve network effects through bootstrapping, or do you need a VC to do that? No, you can absolutely start achieving network effects without a VC, and you'd be much more likely to attract a VC if you could show that you had them. The fact that there were network effects would probably, I think there's correlation between that and virality, would probably kick off virality, would probably mean that you were enjoying some really nice traction, and would likely to gain you more favorable terms with VCs. VCs like to see that these things already exist. But if you don't have them, or don't have them to the degree to which your VC believes they might be possible, then if you think they are possible in your business, then finding a VC with demonstrated experience of helping companies grow them would be a good place to start looking for capital. Excellent. Thanks for the responses. So now we're moving on to the gross margin. How would you characterize the gross margin of your business? Remember that the gross margin is very important because it's what helps you cover the expenses of your business. It's also What helps you retain the necessary capital to fund your own growth? And what would be better than being able to fund your own growth and negotiate with private investors when you needed them on favorable terms? Imagine a business that had strong scores in all of the prior categories and was also a very high margin business. So obviously, software businesses, for-profit software businesses, tend to have the highest margins. Product-related businesses, hardware, IoT, anything physicals, maybe struggles. But a lot of times, lower gross margins may just be the result of, failing to polish your business model sufficiently, or maybe you're still at such an early stage that you're, working the kinks out of things, and you're confident that these margins may be improved or significantly improved with a little bit of extra time. So it would be interesting to know over here in the chat box, for those of you that are willing to share, if you scored yourself at 50% or less, is that because you're in that state that I described where it's still so early that you're working the kinks out and you feel confident that it's something that can be improved? Or do you believe that it's just the nature of your product and the costs of doing business, or something fundamental to the business model that may not be able to be resolved? Any comments to that effect would be helpful for our notes. Cool. So moving on. As it relates to gross margin, please rank the following statements on a scale of 1 to 10. We really don't know our gross margin that accurately. Or we know the gross margin on our product, but we don't know how to increase it. Or we have plans in place to increase gross margin, and we think we know how to do that. Finally, we need help figuring out how to increase our gross margin. Okay. Excellent. Yeah, so it'd be very helpful here if in this area, in fact, in all of these areas, that when you come to the boot camp, since you know the kind of questions that we're asking, these are likely to come up again. If you have such plans in place, the kinds that you've alluded to in these rather generic responses, plans to increase your network effects, or plans in place to increase your gross margin, or plans in place to increase virality, it'd be very helpful to kind of come prepared to discuss those and share about them. Okay, very cool. Moving on. With regard to product market fit, how would you describe the current level that your product or service has obtained? You either have no proof of product market fit, you've got some enthusiastic beta testers, you've got some initial revenue and enthusiastic customers, or you're already accelerating your revenues with enthusiastic customers. Okay, Sayantan, any comments on margins for a nonprofit service funded by a for-profit aggregator model from a skill gain externality from the nonprofit part? In a nutshell, a hybrid business model. Any comments on the margin there? So if I'm understanding that correctly, it sounds like you're giving the product away for free, but it's getting paid for by someone else. Maybe that's in the form of corporate sponsorships or grants from people that want to make sure that people obtain the skills that you're offering to provide people. If I'm going down the right track there, then if you're a not-for-profit, it doesn't certainly mean that you need to run a low-margin business, particularly if you want to reinvest and continue to improve things. So I think it's more a question of showing that the business is sustainable, and if it is high margin, wonderful. Then continue to reinvest and improve it and scale it. Okay, so we have a broad range here of responses today. And I thank you for these responses on product market fit. Now, with regard to product market fit, here's a few more questions. We understand how to test for this and validate it. In other words, you're good at getting validation and determining when you have product market fit. You feel confident about that. Or you've pivoted a number of times and can't still find it. Or we already have product market fit for one product and we're now scaling to another. So you're in that multi-threading phase of blitzscaling where you're scaling one thing and seeing good results, and you've decided to take those learnings and extend into something new. Or we need help finding product market fit. Azamat writes, would it be crazy to be driven to address the market failure? For instance, the idea of delivering organic meat from farms to city residents due to the lack of this distribution channel and not from the profit margin. Would it be crazy to be driven to address the market failure? So in other words, you're saying that your motivation is to prove wrong those who have failed before you, and to create a distribution channel and to prove that this can be done in spite of a profit margin? I'm not sure I'm fully understanding the question. And Sayantan writes, somewhat. The skill gained from the first part would have a market of its own later on. So does that mean that the not-for-profit would evolve into having a for-profit side? You mentioned that you're providing these services in the emerging market. I don't know how that works in every market, but I believe if this business you're referring to were based in the US, as long as you have fewer than 50% of the revenue in a not-for-profit is not a for-profit revenue stream, then I think you could still be considered a not-for-profit. Okay, great. So it looks like it's a fairly balanced set of responses here. About half the group feels strongly that they understand how to test and validate for product market fit. Another group believes they need some help. So we will take all of this excellent feedback into consideration. Is it possible to scale in Africa? Literally trying to scale a management consultancy in Nairobi first, and then the whole continent. Why not? I mean, management consultancies from all over the world, starting in many different countries, have scaled to other countries. And many of them have already scaled in Africa. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't start a consulting business in Africa and scale in Africa. The question is, how scalable is management consulting itself, right? And if you've already decided that you want to build a management consulting business, then the way to apply this blitzscaling framework is to look at what you can learn from these business model patterns and these strategies and techniques so that you can scale faster relative to other management consultancies. In other words, if there's something different about the way you manage things and the business model that you choose so that you're able to scale faster than other management consultancies. That would be the best way to think about it in this context. Management consultancy itself is not as inherently scalable as other businesses. because of the nature of the service provision. But if you can find a way to innovate around that, then you may have the most scalable and fastest scaling management consultancy ever conceived of, starting in Africa. And that would be pretty cool. Okay, moving on to the next question. And this one is relating to the leadership team itself and the team's self-perception about its ability to scale. I'm assuming here that many of you who are out there as respondents are representatives of the leadership team. Some of you may be the CEO or other leaders. So this is a question really about yourselves, if it's you. If it's not you, if you are someone who is not the CEO or the leadership team, who are nonetheless coming to the Venture Scaling Bootcamp, that's fantastic as well. This is your opinion of the CEO and the leadership team and whether or not they are capable of scaling. Okay. Sayantan writes back, yes, vice versa. Essentially, school dropout teenagers being trained and monitored, caring for infants that raises their employability in the children's market without following the school college route. Then bootstrapping that in an aggregator model like Uber. All right, well, this is definitely interesting. And there's a lot of linkages there, and I don't see any reason why this isn't an interesting model to pursue. I don't want to offer any categorical responses at this point that could encourage or discourage anything. Our role really here is to try to help you think through the business model and how to employ these frameworks so that you can develop the most scalable model possible, and then know what kinds of decisions are the most advisable at each stage in your scaling journey. So we look forward to seeing you at the boot camp and learning a lot more about this innovative model that you're proposing. So heading back to the slide here, there seems to be a fairly large consensus here that the folks responding know how to scale and simply don't have the resources. And going back to our prior questions, the resources can come from two places. They can come from the business model itself, from growing your distribution, from growing your virality, from improving your gross margin, increasing your sales and self-funding, or if your strategy is different and you believe you have a Blitzscalable opportunity where it truly is a winner-take-all situation or winner-take-most with a strong incentive to be the first mover at scale, then even in spite of the normal indicators, you may wish to try to raise capital and every place in between. So it sounds like another way of saying this, and although I haven't asked the question directly, it sounds like how to raise capital is definitely on everyone's mind. And we got that response in last week's webinar where that question was asked directly. So we've heard you again here that resources and raising resources is important. Junior writes, in my case, I prefer to say that I don't know how to scale because I know many theories and I've studied a lot, but I don't have that experience of growing to a multi-million-dollar company in a short time. I have experience leading established companies and starting up, but not scaling up. That's fair. That is fair. Okay, and these statements apply, again, on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you feel? Just a little more color and nuance to the prior question. Is this the first time your team is scaling? Have you scaled before? Do you have mentors and advisors currently with scaling experience? Or do you feel that you need additional coaching relating to scaling from the point of view of management? You as the leaders and the managers of the company, do you feel that you need advice and coaching on scaling? Cool. All right. Very helpful. It is. I hope it's helpful to you as it is to me to see the way these curves distribute, and this should help everyone, understand a little bit in advance the kind of composition that we're looking at, and you'll be able to rate us as far as how well we've responded to the needs that you've expressed. Fantastic. So Sorcerer Stone writes, so how do I answer this question if I'm a solo founder with regard to the ability to scale my team? Well, in this case, if you're a solo founder, unless, I guess, you're certainly referring to yourself, and even if you are the sole founder, if there are other people that you would consider leaders, maybe you're the sole founder and the sole owner at this point, but if you've hired other people and into quote unquote C-level roles that you consider leaders, then you're ranking your collective ability. If it's just you and a team of support people at a very earlier stage, then it's probably more of a reflection of you and your ability to find the mentorship and advisory relationships that you need, and your ability to be the leader and the mentor to grow the team with you so that that team is able to scale. So in either case, whether you're a solo founder or one of a number of founders, it is a self-reflective question. Excellent. Now, this final question is with regard to your ability to scale. So again, this is another question, self-reflective question for the CEO and the leadership team. How prepared do you feel you are to scale the technology and infrastructural piece of the organization? So this is different from the prior question, which was more referring to you, yourself, the formation of a team, the talent, the leadership ability, the quote unquote knowing what to do, strategic decision making. And in this case, it's building out the technology architecture, growing the platform and its ability to perform well at scale. It's understanding how to open an office or move to a new location or enter into partnership deals in other countries, expand geographically, how to set up a human resources department if you've never had one, or it's more of the structure and the process that is needed to support a scaling business, if that makes sense, as opposed to the human dimension. Great. So we have a nice balance of responses here, from some saying, this is an area that I don't feel so strong in. And the good thing about it, about thinking about things in the context of blitzscaling is there's some advice about when you need to worry about these things. And it may well be that if you're one of the folks that rates yourself as low, that you're still at an early enough stage that these are not the most important considerations right now. These are quote unquote fires that you can leave burning. You're not at the point where you needed to hire a sales manager, or you have a insufficiently complicated financial structure. You don't need a controller to invest overnight cash and things of that nature. You haven't grown to a size yet where you need a formal human resources manager and department. So, you know, in some cases, it's a question of when, and knowing when is when for each one of these respective considerations. Okay, Bruno Rocha, hey Bruno, writes, from my perspective in emerging markets, there's a talent gap in technology that impacts negatively how a startup can scale its business. Yep, that is a perspective that we hear very often in emerging markets around the world. So I would say you're not alone. Not sure where you're coming from, but you know, the challenge is real. And so can I talk a little bit about how much support will we get in the bootcamp on those areas? So if what you mean is, sorry, I missed the first part. I think the bootcamp, if I'm understanding your question correctly, can definitely be helpful to you in overcoming some of that talent gap, because the talent gap is usually a part of an overall connectivity gap, right? So we certainly believe strongly, and I see it in my, you know, in my own life, and that probably the most important thing is how connected are you? What is the strength of your network? And there's all kinds of research out there that you can get hold of that validates that. And so it may be the case that that you're not finding talent, but if you come to a boot camp like this, you're going to plug in to it. That is, if you're an effective networker and you build relationships while you're there, you're going to plug into the network of everyone that's there. The MIT network is one of the best on the planet for gaining access to tech talent. Maybe you're already a part of it as an alumnus. If not, it's a great network to plug into. And everyone there, all of us will have our respective networks. And so certainly the boot camp will be intrinsically valuable in terms of getting other people, access to other people's networks to help you fill those talent gaps. And the second thing is how much coaching advice about how to achieve virality and how to scale the human resources. Well, we definitely heard earlier that virality was an important area that people wanted to learn more about. So I suspect that we will address virality at some point in the workshop. We've still got a huddle with our team and the MIT team to come up with the final version of the content based on all of your great feedback. But I got a pretty strong sense that there'll be something in there about virality. And as far as how to scale the human resources, that is an area that you know, that is also being reflected here, that I'm sure we will address. We will definitely share advice, and the management tactics and critical transitions in blitzscaling definitely explicitly address, you know, the what to do when in different ways. The, you know, tolerate bad management until you can tolerate it no longer is, you know, an advice to just keep moving fast.